Okay, so for the first question, how does gender structure global politics? The way I see it is kind of influencing the way other nations are seeing gender in global politics. So that's meaning like pushing towards equality and changing the way that we see the women and just people all over the gender spectrum in politics. Um, so the different versions of feminist theory or the different theories are all kind of based on the way people are looking at women's subordination and how they can change it. So, for example, like liberals are looking at the legal system, Marxists and socialists are looking at the workplace, and post-colonial and post-cultural people are looking at the way that society is affecting feminism and just women in higher positions. Um, that's not to mention that there are a lot more like versions and subsections of all of those feminist theories, but those are the main ones. So, like, liberals are looking at the legal obstacles, and they think that removing those legal obstacles can defeat the way that women are being looked down upon. Marxists and socialists are looking at the workplace. So, what can we change in the workplace, in the labor market, and how can we make that a more equal place? The reading kind of looked at the double burden, which is the idea that women are doing a lot more work and unpaid work, even while they're being paid. And it's just a very unbalanced system. Post-colonial and post-cultural people are looking at the concept that we can't generalize all women because the subordination depends on the class, the race, the gender, and like where they were raised within society. Kind of should be looked at all like completely over all the other ones, and then being like have that applied to all the other ones. What were my opinions on the French government's commitment to secularism, and what was my idea on the bans of the burqas? So the way I saw it was, I don't think that there was like their concept or their claims was that there was a difference between separating the government and the people. But the way I saw it is there's a difference between separating the government and people's representation of religion versus completely suppressing one's religious expression. And that's kind of what they ended up doing. I don't know if that was really what they meant to do. The main targets were the burqas and hijabs. In reality, if they were really claiming to be dividing the way that people are representing their religion, like there should have been an equal platform or an equal like standard of what they're banning, because there was no banning of like the cross or like Stars of David or something like that. So although they were claiming that it was trying to equal the playing field or separating their religion from people's everyday lives and the government, I saw that as kind of an excuse. And then later on, a lot of news sources and a lot of people and journalists were covering the story as the government was claiming it to be they're freeing the women from this religious burden. And that also seems like an excuse because a lot of women in these situations feel like hijabs and burqas are like part of their religious symbols, and they're sacred to themselves. So I think a push to make that a different situation is to move towards making it known that it's safe to wear the hijab and the burqa out in public, but also it's safe to choose not to do so. So what is the significance in gender security or gender insecurity? There's a quote from the reading that said national security can be in tension with individual security. And I think the way that they were saying that is that the safety of the state versus the safety of themselves can both be seen like together. That kind of becomes an issue when you're talking about like starting from the bottom up, whereas if the individual doesn't feel safe, then the community won't feel safe, and then it keeps like climbing up the ladder to be where no one feels safe in the state. And that becomes dangerous because if we're talking about specifically women in power, then no one's going to feel like they can rely on someone that is less masculine. And that was a big part of it, was the perception of masculinity or security in general is a masculine look. The strong soldier is perceived as like a large man with like big muscles and like a very serious like structure to himself. And by keeping that in our heads, we're limiting the way that women can be in power. So then that kind of continues on into the political research about female legislators and female leaders in general. So I kind of looked more into this, and a lot of female leaders and women in politics were starting to be, or like the concept was starting to grasp more of a change in the 1960s, and then from there on we're starting to see more and more women in politics. But that doesn't mean that it's everywhere. It seems to be mostly in like the more westernized cultures that we're seeing more women in the government. And the concept of women being in charge sort of is a little bit still seen as like what we were talking about before with the masculine leader, and it makes it more dangerous for a woman to be in charge, because then they become targeted for just reasons that are beyond comprehension. In 2019, U.S. politics, we're seeing a split and an aggressive outlook towards women in politics, and it seems like if a woman is too high in power, that they're kind of inadequate for the job or the position. And that seems like that's being influenced by a split that we see nationally, politically, between the people of the nation. So people in the far right are more apt to speak out against a woman than the people in the far left. But that's not to say that there aren't women that are like Republican in the right side. It just seems like the women on the left are seen as more like drastic, and maybe that's because they're given more of a voice. It's not necessarily true everywhere, but that kind of seems to be the conclusion here. But yeah, once a woman is given a position in U.S. politics, that doesn't mean that they officially have a voice. It means like they may be there, but maybe they're not given the same opportunities as a man in the workplace. So that kind of also makes it harder, because that means women are fighting harder to get their voices heard in politics, and that could be seen as more aggressive, and maybe that could turn people off and citizens off from whatever is happening in politics at the time. So I think overall, as like the world, we're making huge strides towards having women in politics and having them feel safe in just positions of work in general. But that's not always the case. Women are still constantly fighting to have their say and even being given a voice. And also just people all over the gender spectrum, because as we're coming into this world of like new things being introduced, new concepts, new feelings of people's gender and identity, that's also being suppressed, and that's a whole other topic to talk about. But yeah, we're just completely taking a new step politically, and especially in the United States, we're trying to take a step towards giving equal opportunities to women, and the more it's talked about just in public in general, I think that is going to change the way that we see it as a nation, as citizens. And then as we start to do that, especially in the U.S., having some of the biggest voices in social media and news and politics and everything, I think that will influence the world to further see different views.